Hey guys, tonight we're trudging back in time, way back to a world glazed in mist, alive with thunderous footfalls, and filled with creatures that don't exactly fit inside your average pet carrier. You're not walking through some cozy forest trail right now. Nope. You're knee-deep in a prehistoric marshland, and something very large, very fuzzy, and very beavery is watching you from behind a cattail the size of a flagpole. Its nose twitches. Its yellow-orange teeth glint in the low Ice Age sunlight. And those teeth, yeah, they're as long as your finger and built like woodworking tools. You freeze. It grunts. Then it waddles forward gracefully, confidently, like it owns the entire Canadian bog. Because in a way, it does. You've just met Castoroides ohioensis, better known as the giant beaver. And no, this isn't your cousin's national mascot plushie. This beast could be up to 8 feet long, weigh nearly 250 pounds, and could probably drag your kayak across a marsh without asking first. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time you're watching this in the comments below. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle along a spongy trail of moss and half-frozen mud heart, pounding just a little, as the giant beaver eyes you curiously. It doesn't seem aggressive, more like mildly amused. Like it's wondering what sort of confused raccoon you might be. Around you, the world is damp and hushed. The air smells like peat mushrooms and something vaguely fishy. And underfoot, thousands of years before Canada becomes Canada, this stretch of ancient terrain is alive with secrets. You crouch beside a pool of still water. Frogs croak. Dragonflies the size of spatulas buzz lazily. A shadow shifts under the surface. You flinch. But it's just another giant beaver floating like a sleepy log. You can't help but laugh softly, nervously. These animals don't really look dangerous. But they do look powerful. Those hind legs are thick and muscular. Their paddle-like tails flick with the casual arrogance of something that's never had a natural predator. Until humans show up anyway. Back then, this part of the world was basically a cold, soggy buffet. Glaciers loomed in the north, slowly melting and feeding sprawling wetlands below. Rivers meandered across what would eventually become southern Ontario, Manitoba, and the upper Midwest of the United States. You'd find enormous herds of mammoths trudging in the distance, dire wolves lurking in the shadows, and saber-toothed cats draped dramatically on rocky ledges like prehistoric Instagram models. But down here near the edge of the reed-choked swamps, this was beaver country. Giant beavers, to be specific. And they weren't just lumbering about in isolation. Historians still argue whether these creatures lived in small family pods or massive colonies like their modern beaver cousins. But either way, you get the sense that they were busy, constantly moving, swimming digging, always shifting the terrain in some slow, quiet, stubborn way. One fringe theory even suggests these creatures were early engineers, not in the tool-using blueprints and hard hat sense, but in their instinctive ability to reshape landscapes. That's right. Some paleontologists propose that giant beavers didn't just live in swamps, they helped create them. Their constant wallowing, burrowing, and mound building may have transformed open landscapes into complex wetlands over time. Like big furry terraformers with a fondness for puddles. You glance over your shoulder. That first beaver is still there, munching serenely on a cluster of reeds. Its teeth, slice through the fibrous stems with slow, deliberate crunches. Each bite echoes softly like the ticking of a wooden metronome. And while we're on the subject of teeth, yes, let's talk about those. Because those incisors, they weren't just for show. Modern beavers have iron-rich enamel that gives their teeth that distinctive orange glow, and the giant beaver, it had something similar, only more intense. Their incisors curved in a way that made them ideal for slicing through vegetation, though not necessarily wood. That's the twist. These mega rodents probably weren't the timber harvesting dam builders we imagine when we hear the word beaver. Instead, scholars believe they may have fed more like aquatic grazers eating soft vegetation, reeds bark, and maybe the occasional root salad, which does raise a fascinating image. Imagine Venice, but instead of gondolas, there are 250-pound fur balls slowly drifting through canals, snacking on lily pads, like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. Of course there's debate, always debate. Some paleontologists are still unsure about what the giant beaver actually ate. Did they gnaw? Did they chew wood? Some fossils suggest yes, others not so much. The truth probably lies somewhere between textbook certainty and guesswork fueled by wishful thinking. You step a bit closer to the water's edge, careful not to slip. The ground squishes. The air thickens. And somewhere far off, a low bellow rumbles through the mist. Another beaver. A moose. A warning. Too late. A smaller but still very large beaver barrels out of the underbrush, splashes into the water and disappears. The big one doesn't even flinch. You swear it smirks. Here in the marsh, time doesn't move in minutes. It moves in ripples, in rustles, in the creak of cattails, and the distant thud of giant paws. You sit on a rock, cold, mossy, vaguely shaped like a saddle, and just watch. Watch the beavers go about their ancient, squishy lives. Watch them vanish and reappear, never in a hurry. You get the sense that these creatures never feared extinction. They didn't plan for the future. They just existed. Fully, unapologetically, damply. And honestly, there's something peaceful about that. The beaver is gone now, vanished with a slap of its massive tail into the water. Though you're not entirely sure if it meant goodbye or just mind your business. You stand up, brush moss from your knees, and look out across the wetland landscape. Fog hangs low and thick, curling around every branch and ripple like a lazy ghost. But if you listen closely, you can hear the world breathing through chirps, groans, and the gurgle of meltwater from the glacial north. This was Canada before the ice cracked. The land under your feet is alive in that ancient, heavy kind of way, untouched by concrete power lines or highways. No coffee shops here, no Wi-Fi, just mud and wind and a lot of prehistoric attitude. The Ice Age is starting to loosen its grip, but for now, southern Canada is one giant, soggy paradise. The forests haven't taken over yet. Instead, low shrubs, tall grasses, and a few scattered conifers form the playground for some of the strangest megafauna to ever stomp, crawl, or paddle their way through history. You take a few careful steps toward a rocky ledge, and from up here, the view is wild. Literally. Herds of musk oxen dot the horizon, clumped together like giant, shaggy clouds on hooves. Massive moose wade, chest-deep through swamps, munching sedges with the expression of animals who know they're majestic and frankly don't care what you think. Somewhere behind a grove of trees, you hear a loud crunching sound that could be a bear, or something much worse, and among them, beaver trails. Paths worn into the mud, leading from water to land and back again in slow, looping spirals. These aren't neat little construction sites like modern beaver ponds. No carefully chewed sticks or smart little domes. The homes of the Castoroides were most likely simpler large burrows dug into soft banks, wide tunnels, leading to underwater entrances and maybe a primitive pile of debris here and there. Historians still argue whether the giant beaver ever truly built lodges like its modern cousin. Some say yes, citing fossil clusters and disturbed sediment that suggest nesting areas. Others argue that the beast was too big and too clumsy for that kind of home improvement. After all, how do you sneak into a cozy wood hut when your butt's the size of a smart car? Either way, what's clear is this: the land here was shaped by water, and the water was shaped by beavers. Over centuries, their endless digging and dredging likely altered the flow of rivers, widened marshlands, and created new habitats that other species relied on without ever filing a single permit. You crouch again and trace your fingers through a fossil embedded in stone. A branch, no, a bone. A fragment of what was once a jaw, its edges worn smooth by time and rain. A relic from an animal that likely died peacefully, curled in its burrow, while the Ice Age world rumbled on above. Just behind you, something shifts. You turn and spot a low shadow moving between the cattails. Another giant beaver, this one younger, its fur glistening with dew, its eyes bright but cautious. It sniffs the air and lumbers into the water with a gentle plop. You wonder what it's thinking. Probably something deep like read, good stick, bad. The more you watch them, the more it sinks in. These were not slow, dumb giants. They were part of a delicate, squishy puzzle, woven into an ecosystem that hummed with cooperation and quiet competition. Every splash had meaning. Every tunnel a ripple effect. But of course, the giant beaver wasn't alone here. Far across the marsh, a shadow passes a large, lumbering figure with curved tusks and shaggy fur that glows golden in the low sun. A woolly mammoth. You hold your breath. It doesn't see you. It's busy dragging its enormous feet through a shallow stream, knocking rocks aside like pebbles. Birds swirl overhead. A flock of passenger pigeons, yes. Those passenger pigeons flutters in chaotic harmony, not yet extinct, not yet erased. Back then, the skies over Canada weren't silent. They were full of wings. The forests were alive with sounds we'll never hear again. The soil churned beneath creatures that had never encountered asphalt or steel. And in this vibrant chaos, the giant beaver thrived, not just as an animal but as a presence. One fringe theory floating around academic circles suggests that these creatures may have had minor migratory patterns. That is, they didn't just pick one swamp and stick to it. They followed the melting edges of the glaciers, shifting their habitat seasonally, like retirees with webbed feet. Of course, that's still debated. Some scientists dismiss the idea entirely, pointing to their poor mobility on land. But then again, maybe they didn't migrate far. Maybe just enough to chase the freshest reeds. You pause to imagine what it would have been like to live back then, not as a tourist from the future, but as part of a small human tribe. You'd have to compete with these colossal rodents for resources, or maybe learn to coexist. Maybe, just maybe, someone in your tribe figures out how to ride one. Now, that's a story historians haven't written down yet. Your thoughts are interrupted by a sudden burst of splashing. A trio of beavers juveniles, based on size, chase each other around a half-sunken log, their play surprisingly graceful for animals that look like walking ottomans. You smile. There's something oddly familiar about their behavior. They're not that different from otters or puppies or bored kids at a pool party. Just wetter, and bigger, and more likely to flatten a canoe if they felt like it. You stay like this for a long time just watching, letting the damp air seep into your bones, feeling the pulse of a land before time realized it was running out. You can almost hear it in the hush of wind. Through the reeds, this world knew it was temporary. Nothing this beautiful lasts forever, especially not when the ice starts to crack. And when it does, oh boy, we'll get there soon enough. You wake up, or maybe you never really fell asleep on a hummock of moss surrounded by the quiet symphony of the Ice Age. The morning mist curls off the water like steam rising from a tea kettle. And for a moment, everything feels still. Then a branch cracks. A splash echoes across the marsh. And there it is again, waddling into view. Like the star of a children's book drawn by someone with a sense of scale issues a giant beaver. Now let's pause for a second and talk about just how big these things really were. Because giant beaver sounds cute until you're standing next to one and suddenly re-evaluating your life choices. The Castoroides wasn't just a modern beaver with big dreams. No. This creature was a rodent gone rogue. It stretched up to 8 feet long, which if you're wondering is roughly the length of a grown man laid out on a canoe, and weight-wise somewhere between 200 to 300 pounds. That's heavier than most full-grown Great Danes and about the size of a professional sumo wrestler except with teeth. And oh, those teeth! Let's talk incisors because the Castoroides had a set that would make any orthodontist both horrified and fascinated. These were not the neat little buck teeth of your garden variety beaver. These things were massive orange, curved like scimitars, and grooved on the sides, perfect for slicing through tough vegetation, or possibly for fencing lessons, depending on how creative you're feeling. Unlike modern beavers whose teeth are sharp and chisel-like, thanks to iron deposits, the giant beaver's incisors were more rounded, almost spoon-shaped and curved backwards. Some scholars believe this odd design made them less suited to gnawing wood and more likely used for stripping soft aquatic plants or digging into mud. But as usual, paleontologists disagree. Historians still argue whether the Castoroides used its teeth for chewing wood at all or if their diet was entirely free of tree-based calories. You shuffle forward for a closer look, quietly respectfully because no one wants to spook a 300-pound rodent. This particular beaver is perched on the edge of a muddy rise, squatting comfortably while chewing something long and green and very unappetizing. Its fur is a tangled mess of damp curls, darker around the shoulders where water has soaked in. Its tail, surprisingly narrow compared to today's broad beaver pancakes, flicks lazily every few moments as if swatting away invisible thoughts. It doesn't acknowledge you, because frankly, why would it? To give you a sense of its scale, imagine walking through your backyard at night and coming face to face with a brown bear, only instead of growling, it just wants to show you its collection of swamp vegetables. It's an oddly humbling encounter. You don't know whether to pet it or file a complaint with nature. Back in the day, you might have stumbled on these creatures fairly often if you were brave, foolish, or just really lost. Fossils have been found all over North America, particularly in places like Ohio. Hence the species name Ohioensis, Illinois, and throughout southern Canada. They seem to have favored slow-moving bodies of water lakes, ponds, marshes, basically anywhere, with more mud than rules. The geography of their time wasn't unlike today's but wetter, wilder, and covered in the footprints of species that no longer exist. You scan the trees, half expecting to see a modern beaver waddling in for a size comparison. If that happened, it would look like a dachshund pulling up next to a Clydesdale. The modern beaver tops out around 60 pounds and about 3 feet long tail included. In other words, adorable, industrious, and nowhere near capable of flipping over a canoe with one accidental flop. But the Castoroides. That's another story. If it bumped into your campsite, you'd probably assume it was a bear and start Googling how to play dead. And yet, despite their size, there's something deeply peaceful about these creatures. Maybe it's the slow movements, or the way their eyes blink unbothered by everything. Or maybe it's just the marsh. The silence here does something to your nerves. It slows you down, unwinds the coil of modern stress one squishy step at a time. Suddenly, another beaver emerges from the undergrowth. This one older, broader in the shoulders, its fur streaked with white. It grunts softly and nudges the younger one aside to claim the prime munching spot. There's no fight, no drama, just a polite but firm shuffling of positions. It's like watching two fussy grandpas argue over who gets the best recliner at the family barbecue. A thought occurs. Could these creatures have had social hierarchies? Scientists aren't sure. Fossil evidence doesn't tell us much about behavior. But based on their close relation to modern beavers, some paleontologists suggest they might have lived in small family groups or loose colonies. Others think they were solitary big ol' introverts who just wanted to eat in peace and wallow alone. Whatever the truth, it's clear they weren't predators. Their teeth were intimidating, yes, but their lifestyle was slow, swampy, and decidedly plant-based. More yoga retreat than battlefield. They weren't here to fight. They were here to chill. You move along a ridge, careful not to slip, and glance back one last time. The big beaver yawns, revealing a mouth full of plant-pulped mystery. Then it rolls lazily into the water, disappearing with barely a ripple. Behind you, the forest exhales. You keep walking. You trudge deeper into the wetlands. Your boots, if you had any, making that satisfying squelch sound with every step. A light fog rolls through the lowland trees, and the world grows quieter, more insulated, like you've stepped into a secret. The giant beavers are behind you now, but their presence still hums in the reeds and shallow ripples. But tonight, you're not alone in the swamp. Not by a long shot. Because in the world of the Castoroides, neighbors weren't just ducks and frogs. Nope. Their community included some of the most dramatic, oversized, and frequently toothy roommates the Ice Age could dream up. You catch movement out of the corner of your eye. A large shape, fluid, quiet, and too low to be human, moves across the hill beyond the marsh. You duck instinctively behind a rock. It's a dire wolf. Bigger than any wolf you've ever imagined, with a barreled chest and a muscle built for bone cracking. It moves in a slow, confident gait, nose to the windtail twitching. A predator that earned its fear not with speed but with sheer grit. Now you understand why the beavers stick to the water. Dire wolves weren't specialist hunters like their modern relatives. They didn't need to chase you down at lightning speed. They just wear you out, tear you down, and invite their whole terrifying family to the buffet. But it's not just wolves out here. A guttural roar echoes across the forest. You freeze. Something moves in the mist, low to the ground, muscular and unmistakably feline. That friend is a saber-toothed cat. Smilodon fatalis. Roughly the size of a lion but twice as dramatic, with fangs like steak knives, and an attitude problem to match. You peek as it slinks by, eyes alert, ears twitching. Unlike lions, saber-tooths probably didn't sprint much. They were ambush predators built for surprise hugs that ended badly. And yet, despite all this toothy competition, the Castoroides endured. Not by fighting, not by hiding, but by sticking to its own little corner of the ecosystem and completely owning it. It helps that the beavers had their own kind of built-in defense water. Most of these megafauna saber-tooths, dire wolves, even the occasional short-faced bear weren't aquatic. And while they could drink from the swamp, they didn't exactly enjoy going in past the knees. One bad step and suddenly you're a very soggy predator with a twisted ankle and soggy pride. The beavers, on the other hand, they lived in that slop. They thrived in it. They had the advantage of maneuverability of underwater hideouts, of being able to vanish with a single dive. It was less about teeth and claws and more about knowing the terrain like it was your own back pocket. But it wasn't all fangs and fur out here. As you push deeper into the trees, you start to notice signs of another species. One that walks upright, one that uses tools, one that might have looked a little like you if you hadn't just spent the last 2 days face down in marsh muck. Yes, humans. The earliest people in North America. These were likely Paleo-Indians, maybe ancestors of the Clovis culture. They traveled in small bands following migrating herds, hunting with finely crafted stone tools, and according to some archaeologists, possibly having the world's most complicated relationship with giant beavers. You crouch beside a half-buried fire pit, long cold, long abandoned. A few flint shards scattered nearby sharp enough to cut through leather or fur or, well, let's just say the locals had options. Did they eat the Castoroides? That's still up for debate. Historians still argue whether early humans actively hunted giant beavers or merely scavenged them when one died of natural causes. After all, a 300-pound rodent is not an easy kill, especially when it can vanish into a swamp faster than your spear can whistle. And then there's the whole, where do we even put that much meat question? Still, if you're cold hungry and tired of mammoth jerky, a giant beaver might start to look pretty delicious. One fringe theory suggests that some early humans may have even observed and imitated beaver behavior, building water channels, damming streams, learning to manipulate the landscape through observation. It's not mainstream science yet, but wouldn't that be something? Giant beavers as the original civil engineers and humans as their low-tech apprentices. The thought makes you smile and then shiver, because you're not alone anymore. From a distant reach, you see them. Small figures silhouetted against the sunset, humans wrapped in animal skins, moving slowly in single file. Their movements are cautious, deliberate. This is not their first trek through this swamp. And as one pauses to raise a hand to her brow, scanning the horizon, you wonder, is she looking for a beaver or trying to avoid one? You crouch down and watch as the group sets up a temporary camp. There's no shouting, no fire yet, just a soft rustle of movement. And near the edge of their clearing, someone's already digging. A trench, a basin, possibly to collect water, possibly to trap something. You can't help but think of your beaver friends from earlier. Were they watching too? Was there ever a moment 1,000 years ago where a curious human and a curious rodent locked eyes across a marsh equally confused by each other's weirdness? Possibly, probably, definitely. And somewhere behind you a splash. You turn hard in your throat, but it's just another Castoroides, swimming through the cattails, lazy, unbothered, magnificent. This land, this time, it wasn't about apex predators or clever humans. It was about coexistence, about surviving in your own lane, paddling your own path and occasionally stealing the spotlight by being the biggest beaver in town. The humans vanish behind the trees, and the beavers melt into the water like furry ghosts. You're left standing in the middle of a half-formed Canada, soggy, wild, and busier than you ever imagined. A few steps forward and the terrain shifts again. The reeds thicken, the air turns heavier, and then You hear it. The faint clunk scrape and splash of labor. It's not human. It's not mechanical. It's instinct. You creep closer, and there they are, a group of Castoroides, going about their mysterious marsh business, with the kind of slow, deliberate intensity usually reserved for IKEA furniture assembly. But they're not chewing logs. They're not building tidy stick domes like today's beavers. They're dragging stuff. Big stuff. You watch as one giant beaver waddles backward, heaving a soggy mass of waterlogged reeds and mud up a bank. Another uses its wide muscular hips to pivot a small tree trunk. Not chewed, just hauled. They're not sculptors, not exactly. More like very damp landscapers reworking the terrain with persistence rather than precision. Here's where it gets weird. Despite their clumsy appearance, they're efficient, coordinated even. The older one sets down its burden. Two others nudge the pile with their snouts. There's grunting. Tails slap the mud. Then all three wander off to collect more debris, as if following a blueprint written in instinct. You step back a little stunned. This isn't random nesting. It's not just a food stash. It looks purposeful. Some researchers have long dismissed the idea that Castoroides build anything at all. The modern beaver is famous for its dam building, of course, chewing trees, assembling sticks, managing water flow like a very civil engineer. But the giant version, its teeth weren't as sharp. Its tail wasn't the flat paddle we know. For decades, scholars assumed it simply burrowed into riverbanks like a groundhog with an amphibious side hustle. But then came the theory. The idea that giant beavers weren't just grazing and splashing aimlessly, but actually shaping the land, building things, not wooden dams, no, but maybe massive muddy mounds, possibly even water-diverting embankments, what some call proto-structures. No blueprints, no contractor license, just instinct layered over generations. Fringe historians, those glorious chaos gremlins of academia, have even floated the possibility that Castoroides was on the verge of creating a marsh-based city. Not Venice with gondolas and overpriced espresso, obviously, but a vast aquatic habitat, interlinked pools, passageways, and food zones carefully shaped over centuries by instinctual building. A rodent Venice, if you will. Minus the romantic accordion music. Is there proof, kind of? Some paleontologists have discovered strange sediment patterns and clustered fossil beds, suggesting repeated long-term occupation of specific wetland areas by Castoroides groups. Layers of displaced mud, consistent water flow redirection, and fossilized plant matter indicate that something or someone was rearranging nature's furniture over and over again. Historians still argue whether these patterns are natural flood behavior or early evidence of beaver-made infrastructure. You imagine it now, an enormous semi-floating colony of interconnected dens, each accessible only by underwater tunnel. Pathways groomed by generations. A marshy megastructure not built by tools but by time and teamwork. And probably a lot of squishy tail slaps. A low rumble startles you out of the daydream. Thunder. A predator. No, it's the beavers again. One of them lets out a deep resonant grunt that sounds more like a tuba underwater than an animal. Another responds with a short, high-pitched bark. Communication. Definitely not random. Were they social? Probably. Did they have calls, signals, warnings? Most likely. Modern beavers have a range of vocalizations, and given the size of their ancient cousins, it's reasonable to think their marshy conversations had even more texture. Grunts for warning, snorts for frustration, chirps for stop poking me with your tail, Some researchers believe these sounds may have played a role in group coordination during construction or defense. Others suggest they were just your standard animal chatter. Nothing dramatic, just grumbling through swamp chores like soggy retirees. You sit on a fallen log to watch the action. The more you observe, the more you realize how little we truly know. Fossils can only tell us so much. Bones don't hum. Teeth don't slap tails. The marsh is writing its own language and you're just trying to keep up. Then a splash behind you. You spin around, startled, but it's just a juvenile Castoroides watching you from the water. Its eyes are calm, unreadable. It blinks once, then twice, and then it dives tail, flicking upward like a punctuation mark. You realize something in this moment. You're not the observer. You're the anomaly. This is their world, their swamp, their story. And as you rise to your feet and glance back at the tangle of reeds, debris, and shifting water pathways, you wonder, maybe they weren't just surviving. Maybe, just maybe, they were designing. The day drips by like the marsh itself, slow, heavy, and quietly plodding. Somewhere behind you, the group of beavers continues their rearrangement of plant matter and half-submerged sticks, totally unfazed by the deep mystery of whether they're accidentally building Canada's first suburb. You leave them to it, sloshing your way through the knee-deep water with the awkward grace of someone realizing their socks are now part of the swamp. The path takes you toward higher ground where the mud thins out just enough to let your boots imaginary, though they may be stop suctioning like marshmallow glue. Trees loom taller here, older with thick trunks wrapped in vines and mist. The chirps and rustles grow fainter and for a brief moment you're alone. Then you see it, a single oddly familiar shape, wobbling along a slope, a regular beaver. An actual, modern beaver. Compact, tidy tail, wide and flat like a leather ping-pong paddle. It looks at you with the same expression a house cat gives when you've interrupted its existential pondering. Then it huffs and waddles off. And that's when the differences really hit you. If the Castoroides were the grizzly bears of the rodent world, modern beavers are more like multitasking accountants, efficient, twitchy, and with absolutely no time for your nonsense. Their tails are one of their most iconic features. Broad, flat, used for balance, swimming, and slapping warnings on the water like a soggy Morse code. But the giant beaver tail may. Fossil evidence suggests that the Castoroides had a tail that was longer, narrower, and probably more muscular than its modern counterpart. Not the squashy, rubbery paddle we know today, but something stiffer, more like a muscular rope, or a meaty oar. Still useful in water, sure, but not optimized for balance or communication, which leads to a fun debate. Did the giant beaver slap its tail? You'd think, yes, right, big tail, big splash, big get away from me energy. But paleontologists are split. Some say the tail shape wouldn't have allowed for the loud crack modern beavers use to warn others of danger. Others argue it could still have produced a kind of thudding ripple, less cannon shot, and more somebody dropped a watermelon. Historians still argue whether Castoroides engaged in tail-slapping behavior at all, or if that evolved later as beavers got smaller, faster, and much more passive-aggressive. Another big difference, chewing. Your average modern beaver spends its days turning perfectly innocent trees into architectural masterpieces. They're nature's carpenters, driven by an almost irrational compulsion to chop, drag, and pile. Their incisors are shaped like chisels, sharp, durable, and constantly growing. That's right. A beaver's teeth never stop growing, which is adorable in theory, and horrifying if you're, say, made of wood. But Castoroides. That's where things get interesting. You duck under a hanging branch and come across a patch of old sediment thick with plant debris and ancient roots. You kneel down and spot a half-buried object of fossilized tooth. Thick, curved, grooved on the sides like someone carved it with a melon bowler. This wasn't a chisel. It was a scythe. The giant beaver's teeth were still orange thanks to iron-rich enamel and still grew throughout its life. But they were shaped differently, rounder, more like digging tools than saw blades. And here's the kicker. Castoroides. Probably didn't chew through wood at all. Shocking maybe, disappointing a little. But logical absolutely. The creature's jaw musculature combined with its tooth shape points to a diet based mostly on aquatic plants, soft vegetation and possibly the roots and bark of fallen trees. Nothing that required industrial-grade lumberjack energy. This explains why we don't find their fossil homes stacked with logs. They didn't need them. They weren't builders in the classic sense. They were marsh gourmets, slurping up lily stems and bulrush like it was a Michelin-starred buffet. You stand and brush the sediment from your hands. A light drizzle begins to fall. The drops tap against the wide leaves around you, adding rhythm to the quiet. And it's in this moment that another difference emerges: behavior. Modern beavers are meticulous. Their homes are clean, their dams carefully curated, their social lives fairly organized. Pairs mate for life. Families stay together. There's structure rules, even territory. But the Castoroides, well, that's a mystery. Fossils suggest they were solitary, or maybe loosely social. Their massive size might have made it harder to live in tight quarters. Or maybe they just preferred elbow room. Some scholars think they may have been seasonal breeders, meeting only to mate, and then parting ways like giant damp introverts. Others argue they might have gathered loosely in shared wetland areas like a swampy HOA without the newsletter. We just don't know. There's no way to fossilize feelings. No ancient cave mural of a beaver family dinner. Just bones and questions. You reach the crest of a small rise and look out over a wide, misty channel. Below, 3 giant beavers drift like dark logs on a lazy current. They move in slow, synchronized turns, brushing against one another, then splitting off again like ink in water. No fight, no fuss, just presence. A breeze picks up, carrying the sharp scent of damp earth and ancient moss. You breathe it in. It's easy to forget that you're standing on a prehistoric timeline, that these beavers, massive and calm and oddly elegant, were once just here, doing their thing, eating their salad, avoiding saber-tooths, and slowly, inevitably fading away. But we're not there yet. For now, the marsh is still full. The beavers still paddle. The water still rises and falls with the lazy rhythm of a world not yet in crisis. And you, soggy and stunned, are left with the realization that for all their similarities, these creatures were not just oversized versions of their modern cousins. They were a species entirely their own. Different teeth, different tails, different dreams. The wind shifts as you descend from the ridge, carrying with it the low gurgle of water and the faint rhythmic sound of movement, not rustling, more like dragging, repetitive, measured. As you approach the marsh's edge once again, the trees part to reveal something that makes you stop in your tracks. A wide, shallow pool stretches out before you, its surface dappled with lily pads, half-sunken logs, and most notably a web of raised mounds. Long, low, muddy embankments crisscross the landscape like a labyrinth. Between them, channels of water loop and fork in a way that doesn't feel accidental. It's not natural, it's deliberate. You crouch behind a cluster of ferns and watch. There they are, 6 giant beavers, waddling through the shallows, pulling plants, mud, and the occasional log toward different mounds. They work slowly, awkwardly, but with a kind of quiet dedication that makes you wonder if they even know why they're doing it. Maybe they don't. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe instinct is the blueprint. This weird, wet patchwork of elevated mud and aquatic canals is at the heart of one of the most bizarre, delightful theories to ever come out of a paleontology conference, the Beaver City hypothesis. Now, no one's suggesting these animals were founding marsh monarchies or naming neighborhoods, but some researchers on the fringe naturally believe that Castoroides didn't just build nests or dig holes. They may have created entire aquatic settlements, vast interlinked mounds that provided shelter, food access, and water flow control. Think of it as Venice but without buildings, and instead of singing gondoliers, you've got 300-pound rodents chewing pondweed like it's their job. And honestly, watching them now, it doesn't seem so far-fetched. Historians still argue whether these structures were planned ecosystems or just side effects of really determined nesting. But sediment layers in certain fossil-rich areas like southern Ontario and parts of Minnesota have shown signs of repeated construction erosion and rebuilding, as if something kept coming back decade after decade and rearranging things. In modern beaver ponds, this kind of pattern would scream dam activity. But Castoroides lacked the strong incisors and tool-making jaw shape needed for woodwork. So how could they build well, not with sticks, but with mud and reeds, and possibly the strategic use of whatever fallen branches nature happened to drop in their path? You watch as one particularly large beaver pulls a cluster of muddy grass into a rising pile. It nudges it into place with its snout, then presses it down with its full body weight. Another approaches and does the same. No blueprints, no yelling, just synchronized squish engineering. And it's not just one mound. There are at least 4 within your view, each with a sloped edge, leading gently into a surrounding water channel. If you were a smaller predator or a slightly soggy human, trying to get a better view, you'd struggle to walk this maze without ending up waist-deep in bog. And maybe that was the point. Some paleontologists speculate that these proto-settlements could have been used as protective zones, dense networks of mud and water that discouraged predators from sneaking up on nesting beavers or younglings. It wasn't just about building, it was about survival by layout. Another theory, less popular but more fun, proposes that these structures could have even helped trap food. As water moved more slowly through the winding channels, it deposited sediment and nutrients, allowing rich plant growth in easy reach. It's a self-sustaining salad bar built by instinct. You rise slightly trying to get a better view. The sheer scale is impressive. This isn't just one family of beavers messing around. This is a colony, if not in the social sense, then at least in the architectural one. Multiple animals working together across generations, creating a stable habitat in a landscape that's anything but predictable. And then you spotted a massive central mound. Higher than the others, its sides reinforced with what looked like carefully placed stones. You blink. No way. Did they intentionally use those rocks? Now you're in wild territory. Some paleoanthropologists scoff at the idea. Beavers using stones absurd. There's no evidence of tool use. No hands. No opposable thumbs. No artistic ambition. But here's the thing. Just because they didn't craft the stones doesn't mean they didn't move them. And if they moved them, what does that say about their spatial awareness? About their ability to think ahead? To manipulate the environment, not just for the now, but for the next week, the next season. It's not civilization, not by a long shot, but it's something. You watch as one beaver pads slowly up the central mound and flops down near the top. It rests, breathing heavily, mud caked across its fur. Around it, others continue their work in slow ripples of motion. This is not just a feeding ground, it's home, a soggy, squelchy, ambitious home. And while you're standing there quietly mind-blown by rodent engineering, you remember a single, strange, almost laughable line from a 1970s field report. The Castoroides may have been the first species to manage water before humans. At the time, it was dismissed as poetic nonsense. But now, looking at this marsh, you start to wonder. You don't know how long you've been standing there half hidden in ferns and fog, but eventually the moment starts to change. The light softens into a dusky amber as the Ice Age sun begins its slow retreat behind the trees. The air cools. Everything seems to exhale. And the beavers, they shift gears. What was slow and methodical during the day now becomes something almost cozy. The frantic dragging of mud and reeds eases into smaller, more deliberate movements. A younger Castoroides lies back in the shallows, half submerged, gently paddling its webbed feet like it's soaking in a prehistoric hot tub. Another nudges at a floating patch of water lilies and begins munching one mouthful at a time. You're witnessing something few ever consider. A day in giant beaver utopia. Here, there's no clock, no schedule. The rhythm of life is set by the pulse of the swamp itself. Slow, sticky, and filled with the kind of peace that makes your modern anxieties seem hilariously pointless. You've got no Wi-Fi, no emails, just a squelch of mud between toes, and the distant grunt of a satisfied rodent snacking on aquatic hors d'oeuvres. Let's take stock of the scene. 7 Castoroides glide through the warm water weaving between patches of reeds and cattails. 2 are clearly a bonded pair. They move in tandem, bumping shoulders every few moments, grunting softly as if sharing private jokes. A third hovers near a small mound and occasionally wiggles into it, head first, probably checking for snacks or squishy roommates. And you sit at the edge of a flat rock that smells faintly of moss and mystery, utterly transfixed. Because this isn't just survival. It's life. Not as we know it, but life nonetheless. And the more you watch, the more you realize these giant beavers weren't monsters. Weren't relics. They were just themselves. Big, yes. A little awkward, occasionally damp, but full of routine comfort and maybe even joy. One of the juveniles flops dramatically onto a thick bed of floating vegetation, wriggles in a circle, then settles in, for what can only be described as the fluffiest, soggiest nap you've ever seen. Its belly rises and falls. Its whiskers twitch. A reed drapes across its face, like a forgotten blanket. You can't help it. You smile. And here's the thing no one tells you about extinct animals. We always picture them fighting, chomping, running, dying. But here you see something different. You see beavers living, just being. And it's quietly beautiful. Their dinner menu surprisingly varied. Mostly aquatic plants, lily stems, cattails, pondweed, and who knows what prehistoric flora grew in these sluggish waters. While it's widely accepted that they didn't eat much wood, some paleobotanists suggest they might have nibbled on soft bark, especially from fallen branches. Not for construction, just for flavor. And now that your nose is tuned into this ancient aroma profile, you start to pick up on the real scent of beaver utopia. A mix of rotting vegetation, clean water, and wet fur. Not exactly candle-worthy, but oddly grounding. It smells like everything is working as it should. There's a soft grunt nearby. You turn to see one of the older beavers sitting upright in the shallow's forepaws, held just beneath its chin in a curiously thoughtful pose. It looks like it's judging you, or trying to remember where it left its lunch. Hard to tell with beavers. As night deepens, the colony moves more slowly. Some disappear into hidden burrows dug into the soft earth along the banks. Others curl up together on drier mounds. You watch one pair make a small nest of gathered grasses, nothing complex, just a pile, before flattening themselves across it with a satisfied squish. A fringe theory, one of those delightfully speculative ones, suggests that Castoroides had specific nesting zones, returning to favored spots season after season. Evidence from certain sedimentary layers hints at repeat habitation pollen deposits, fossilized waste, and wear patterns around ancient burrow sites. Were they sentimental? Probably not, but habitual, almost certainly. You lie back on your rock now listening. Crickets chirp from the woods. A chorus of frogs sings from deeper in the marsh. Somewhere in the distance a dire wolf howls low and mournful. The beavers don't react. They've heard that sound 1,000 times. They know the wolf doesn't like water. And their world, this soggy, buzzing, reed-scented haven, is safe. For now. Because yes, the ice age is shifting. The climate is warming. Things are changing even if the beavers don't know it yet. The rivers that feed their utopia will one day shrink. The forests will push in. And eventually, these lazy waterways will dry into grasslands, where hooves outnumber paws. But in this moment, the world is still theirs. You glance at the sky painted now with streaks of orange and purple clouds backlit like molten ink. The silhouettes of flying birds, big ones, maybe herons or some ancient avian relative, pass overhead in lazy V formation. And all around you the beavers settle. You think about how much we don't know. How much of their daily life is lost forever. How much never fossilized. There's no record of what a baby Castoroides sounded like when it sneezed. No way to know if they played or got jealous or felt joy. But in the quiet warmth of this evening marsh, it sure looks like joy. And for a moment, as you close your eyes and let the sounds wash over you, you wonder if this is the closest thing to time travel we'll ever get. Just being here, in their world, before it all begins to fade. You awaken to the sound of water being slapped hard. It's still dim, not quite dawn, but the beavers are stirring. One particularly cranky-looking Castoroides has just tail-thumped the water, sending ripples through the quiet. It wasn't meant for you. Probably more of a "you're in my spot" situation between roommates. You sit up slowly, wiping dew from your face, and instantly sense something's different. The air has a tension in it, thicker, tighter, less dreamy than yesterday. Birds are quiet. Frogs have fallen silent. The colony isn't going about its morning laziness. It's watching. And then you hear it, the crack of branches breaking. A heavy thump. A short, echoing bellow that vibrates in your chest. Something is coming. A shadow shifts at the far edge of the marsh. Trees sway, one falling with a loud splintering snap. Then another figure emerges, massive, shaggy, and unimpressed with everyone else's boundaries. It's a mammoth. Not the cartoony, kind-eyed version from animated movies. No, this is a bull. Tall as a school bus, tusks long enough to make sword collectors cry. With a coat of tangled muddy fur and eyes that say, "I walk through swamps because I can." And it is not thrilled about finding beavers in its breakfast zone. This is where things get real. You're about to witness a prehistoric turf war. Mammoths versus mega rodents. And you get the distinct sense This sort of thing happened more often than paleontologists like to admit. At first, the beavers hold their ground. One stands on a mound back straight, making a low growling sound you didn't even know beavers could make. The others gather behind, half in water, half out. It's not aggressive, not yet. But it's definitely a "what's your deal, trunk boy" sort of posture. The mammoth lumbers forward, testing the marshy ground. He lifts a massive foot and steps directly onto the nearest mound, squashing weeks of careful mud arrangement in one go. And that's the last straw. 3. Castoroides charge, not biting, not clawing, just rushing at him with the determined energy of furry bulldozers. They're bluffing, but it's a loud bluff. They grunt. They slap the water. One leaps back into the channel and splashes with full soggy commitment. The mammoth flinches only slightly but enough to pause. Now let's be clear, this is not a battle in the traditional sense. The beavers aren't going to take down a mammoth. No amount of attitude can change physics. But what you're seeing is a territorial standoff. And that's fascinating. Some researchers believe that while megafauna like mammoths and beavers coexisted peacefully most of the time, there were likely moments of competition over habitat, especially during seasonal shifts. As wetlands shrank or froze over, everyone squeezed into the same resource-rich zones and tensions flared. Historians still argue whether Castoroides and mammoths ever clashed directly, or if this was more of a passive-aggressive standoff, each avoiding the other while silently judging. But behavior doesn't fossilize. You don't get a warning sign on bones that says, "This guy was kind of a jerk to his neighbors." You have to guess from wear marks, trampled sediment, and the occasional pile of rearranged beaver debris near giant mammoth prints. Back in the swamp, the mammoth decides he's had enough. With an irritated rumble, he veers off his massive bulk, splashing through the outer canal. The beavers watch him go. One lets out a loud snort. Another follows tail held high like a flag of squishy triumph. And then peace resumes, instantly, like it never happened. But you're still catching your breath. That was intense. And not just because of the mammoth's size. What really struck you was how united the beavers became. No hesitation, no chaos, just a unified wall of soggy stomping protest. That kind of group behavior suggests more than just shared territory. It hints at social cohesion, possibly even protective instinct. Could it be that these animals had hierarchies? That some led while others followed modern beavers, work in families with clear roles, mothers, fathers, yearlings, kids. But Castoroides, no one's sure. Still, what you saw sure looked like leadership. One particularly large beaver now circles the damaged mound, sniffing and grumbling before beginning to patch it up. Others join in. No lectures, no punishment. Just teamwork, quiet and muddy. There's a rhythm to it. One scoop of mud, one slap of tail, one low grunt, and repeat. As you watch the repairs unfold, another thought emerges. This kind of territorial display, this calm coordination, this refusal to yield ground, it says something about how rooted these beavers were in their spaces. They weren't wanderers. They weren't drifters. They were settlers, guardians of a place that for all its chaos and murk was home. And in that way, they weren't so different from the humans creeping into the regions during this same time. Small bands of hunter-gatherers building semi-permanent camps near rivers and lakes, learning where the animals were, where the good reeds grew, where the mammoths didn't stomp. You imagine them now huddled on the other side of the forest, hearing the same mammoth bellow you just witnessed. Did they cheer when the beavers stood their ground? Or were they too busy figuring out how not to become mammoth pancakes? Either way, one thing's clear, this place mattered. It mattered to the beavers, to the mammoths, to the frogs, the birds, the humans hiding in the underbrush. And maybe, just maybe, it matters to you now too. Because as you step back into the shadows, heart still thudding from mammoth tension, you realize something kind of beautiful. You're rooting for the beavers. The mammoth is long gone now, just a distant memory, thumping its way into deeper woods. And the swamp has eased back into its lullaby rhythm. Crickets chirping again, frogs daring to croak, and the wind rustling through the reeds like it's saying, all right back to normal, folks. But normal is relative, because now a new set of eyes is watching from the other side of the marsh. Not beady, not furry, but clever, cautious, human. You spot them between two stands of older tree figures crouched low, nearly invisible, if not for the glint of sunlight on a piece of stone. They're small, not in stature necessarily, but in presence. The beavers practically own the swamp. These early humans, they're still guests. Sneaky ones. But guests all the same. They're probably part of a Paleo-Indian band, traveling light and quiet, following food and fresh water across a shifting continent. You can see the tension in their shoulders, the way they study the beavers with a mix of curiosity and something else, something sharper, hunger. This brings us to one of the most whispered questions in the story of Castoroides. Did humans hunt them? Short answer, probably. Long answer, we still don't really know. Historians still argue whether these early peoples actively pursued the giant beaver as prey, or simply scavenged them when opportunity knocked like a carcass, found near the water's edge, already half sunk, maybe left behind by a sick mammoth stepping on the wrong mound. On one hand, Castoroides would have been an attractive target, slow on land, huge amounts of meat, and likely easy to track in marshy terrain. On the other hand, they were massive, hard to kill, and deeply inconvenient if your entire toolkit was made of sharpened rock and determination. You watch the humans now. One gestures to the others a quick flick of the wrist. Then they retreat silent as mist. They're not attacking today. Maybe they're just watching, mapping, waiting. Some archaeological sites have turned up beaver bones alongside human-made tools, and at least a few show signs of butchering. But here's the twist. Most of those bones belong to modern beavers, not the Castoroides. So either the big ones were avoided, or they were hunted with such rarity that their remains never quite made it into the fossil record. A few brave scholars suggest the opposite, that humans relied on giant beavers in certain seasons, especially when other game was scarce. It's a stretch, but not impossible. One fringe theory even proposes that some groups may have timed their movements to coincide with beaver migrations or nesting habits, essentially treating them as soggy, waddling calendars. You step back, your boots sinking into the peat, and start moving along the marsh perimeter. It's quieter here, deeper. And just when you think you've left the humans behind for good, you find the evidence. A ring of stones, scorched earth, a cracked tool hafted with dried sinew and bark, and nearby a pile of old bones. Chewed maybe, carved could be. It's hard to tell without the gentle hands of a paleontologist and a magnifying glass. But one thing is certain, these people lived here, ate here, watched Castoroides from the same muddy banks you're standing on. And maybe, just maybe, they saw the beavers not just as meatbags but as fellow survivors, neighbors even. Strange and ancient as that sounds. Because here's a thought you can't shake. What if there was respect? Not the kind of respect we reserve for icons or heroes. but a quiet, grudging acknowledgement like two stubborn tenants sharing a very leaky apartment. The humans needed water. So did the beavers. The humans needed reeds and shelter and safe fishing zones. So did the beavers. And in this strange coexistence, a line may have been drawn hunt if desperate, but otherwise keep your distance. You stare out over the marsh again. The sky is lighter now. A soft golden haze stretches across the surface of the water. You spot one of the larger beavers returning to its mound, trailing a half-eaten stem behind it, like a sleepy toddler dragging a blanket. And right behind it, a human child. She's maybe 8 barefoot holding a stick. Not chasing, not stalking, just following, curious. She pauses at the water's edge, sits cross-legged and watches as the beaver settles in. Neither moves. The moment stretches long and silent like two pieces of the same prehistoric puzzle, finally noticing each other. And then after a while she gets up, wanders off. You don't know her name, you never will. Her tribe will leave this marsh by the end of the season. The beavers will rebuild. Time will march on. But for now, in this quiet space between predators and prey, there is a pause, a coexistence, a truce. You take a deep breath, the scent of wet vegetation, and cold earth grounding you again. It's so easy to think of history in sharp edges, conquerors hunted extinct. But here now you're reminded that sometimes history shares. Sometimes it just sits quietly by the water. The season is shifting. You don't need a calendar or weather app to know it. The signs are everywhere, etched into the sigh of the wind, smeared in the orange-brown rust of the reeds, sung by birds in slightly more anxious tones. Even the light has changed, softer, lower, tinged with something like memory. And if you were a giant beaver, you'd feel it too. Not just the drop in temperature or the change in leaf texture, but something deeper, an instinctual awareness that the balance is tilting. You watch as one of the older Castoroides drags itself onto a raised mound. It flops down with a grunt and exhales a wheezy breath ice, blinking slowly as it stares at the horizon. Behind it, the younger beavers are still paddling, still foraging. But even they seem more hurried, less playful, focused. Because the climate is starting to tip. We're somewhere near the end of the Pleistocene epoch, that long stretch of time filled with glaciers, megafauna, and just enough chaos to keep everyone humble. But now the ice sheets are melting. Glacial lakes burst their banks. River systems shift. What was once reliable water levels, seasonal vegetation temperature, is beginning to stutter. And for a species like Castoroides, whose whole life is waterbound, this is a big wet problem. You trudge through the marsh noticing things you hadn't before. Pools that were deeper just days ago now stand dry, cracked like ancient pottery. Shorelines inch backward. Soft mud turns brittle. In places, the reeds are yellowing too early, curling as if unsure whether they should still bother growing. And the beavers, they adapt at first. You see them searching new spots, dragging reeds farther, chewing through unfamiliar plants, digging into harder soil. They're persistent, resilient. But you also see something else creeping in confusion. Exhaustion. A particularly large female wanders too far from the water's edge, sniffing through dry grasses, then pausing disoriented. She turns slowly in a circle, then retreats, kicking up dust instead of mud. This isn't normal. Historians still argue whether climate change alone spelled the end for Castoroides, but the timing is suspicious. As the last ice age ends roughly 10,000 years ago, So too does the presence of the giant beaver. Fossil records begin to vanish. No fresh remains. No tracks. Just silence. One theory says their habitats disappeared before they could move or adapt. As wetlands shrank and rivers dried, the very foundation of their world dissolved. These weren't creatures built for migration. They needed water, mud, predictable seasons. When the world stopped offering that, they didn't stand a chance. Another theory points toward human pressure, not just hunting but indirect impact. Burning forests, redirecting streams, competing for resources. It doesn't take mass slaughter to collapse a fragile species. Just enough nudges at the wrong time. And some scholars think it was a combination. The old 1-2 punch of climate chaos and increasing human expansion. A marshland squeeze that quietly erased a species before anyone knew it was at risk. You climb a small hill overlooking what used to be a bustling beaver zone. It's quieter now. The water has retreated, leaving behind skeletal trees and dry reed beds. A single mound remains partially collapsed, half sunk into the mud like a memory slowly being erased. Still, you find signs of life. A juvenile, Castoroides, paddles in one of the last pools, making tight circles as if unsure where to go next. Its fur is patchy, thinner than it should be. It stops and looks up at the sky, though it probably doesn't think of it that way. Maybe it's just wondering why the frogs aren't singing anymore. You move on deeper into the woods where the water still lingers. Here you find one last oasis, a hidden pocket of wetland fed by a spring. It's cooler here, shadier, with just enough life to feel familiar. And here, a small group of beavers. Older, tired, still trying. They're building but slower. The reeds don't hold as well. The mud's not right. A structure they built yesterday already collapsed. But they keep going. Keep scooping, packing, pushing. Because that's what instinct tells them to do. Even when the world forgets how to cooperate, you sit by the edge of the spring, careful not to disturb them. You're not sure how long they've got left. A season maybe. A year if the water holds. But you're watching a species do something humans rarely get to witness. Fade, not with a bang, not with drama or fireworks. Just gradually. It's the most heartbreaking kind of extinction. Not explosive, not obvious. Just an unspoken exit. A gentle erasure of one piece of the world. But as the sky dims and the air cools, something catches your eye. One of the beavers, young, alert, determined, manages to carry a cluster of wet grasses to the edge of the den. It arranges them with surprising care, flattens them with its belly, then sighs. Not everything is gone yet. Somehow that makes it even sadder. You wake again to the sound of nothing. The swamp has gone quiet. Not just peaceful quiet. Hollow quiet. The kind of silence that seeps under your skin and makes your breath feel too loud. You sit up, eyes adjusting to the pale morning light, and immediately feel something has changed. The water level is even lower now. What was a wide rippling pool just yesterday has become a patchwork of puddles and cracked mud. Reed stalks lean over like tired old men. And the smell, that rich, earthy perfume of wet soil and life, has dulled. Stagnant, faintly sour. You stand and scan the clearing. No movement. The giant beavers are gone. All of them. You check the usual places. The mounds. The deeper pools. Even the small spring-fed channel they retreated to when things got bad. Nothing. No grunts. No splashes. No slow, soggy shuffles through the cattails. It's like they vanished overnight. And in a way, they did. Because one of the greatest Ice Age mysteries isn't that the Castoroides went extinct. It's how they disappeared so fast. One day they're there abundant, successful, sprawling across North America. And then they're not. Gone. Historians still argue whether it was a sharp population collapse or a slow scattered die-off. Some fossil records suggest they vanished almost completely by around 10,000 years ago. Others hint that a few survivors may have clung on in isolated wetlands for a while longer, pale, quiet echoes of a giant past. But we don't have a single clear extinction moment. No massive die-off site. No event horizon. Just a slow fade into silence. There's no beaver apocalypse carved into stone or passed down in song. No fossilized tragedy showing desperate herds collapsing beside dried-up riverbeds. Just absence. Like the marsh forgot how to hold them. One theory suggests disease could have played a role. It's possible that pathogens carried by humans or other animals tipped the balance. But there's no direct evidence for that, just speculation. Others believe that habitat loss from glacial retreat caused a perfect storm. As the climate warmed and rivers receded, beavers who once thrived in rich, slow-moving wetlands found themselves stranded in habitats that no longer supported their needs. Less water meant fewer plants. Fewer plants meant less food. Less food meant fewer beavers. You cross into what was once a thriving beaver zone. Now just dry ground with shallow dens where pools used to be. Bits of plant fiber remain here and there, matted into the mud. A piece of half-gnawed reed. A flattened patch of grass. Ghosts. You kneel beside a collapsed mound. The structure is crumbling, its once carefully packed mud now cracked like old skin. You run your hand along the side and find something hard buried near the base, a bone. A lower jaw, fossilized and bleached pale. The teeth are unmistakable, those iconic curved orange incisors dulled, now by time and erosion, but still massive. You turn it over in your hands and feel the weight of it, both literal and symbolic. This was someone soggy, stubborn, and determined to outlast the shifting earth. And they almost did. But here's where the story gets stranger. Some scientists have noted that the extinction of Castoroides coincided very closely with the rise of one other species, modern humans. Not just their arrival, but their settlement, agriculture, permanent homes, the manipulation of landscapes on a scale the world had never seen. Once humans stopped wandering and started reshaping rivers, draining swamps, clearing forests, the beavers didn't stand a chance. They were engineers. Yes, but only of mud and instinct. They couldn't compete with firestone tools, and a species that didn't just live in the landscape, but changed it. One fringe theory even suggests that the disappearance of Castoroides marked a symbolic shift from a world built by animals to a world dominated by people. You stand now holding the jawbone, looking out over a dry marsh where the water used to sing. And you feel it, not just the loss, but the silence that followed it. The earth still turned, yes. The birds still flew. But something important was gone. An entire presence, a way of being. Not fast, not flashy, but persistent, soft, soggy, kind of dumb, kind of wise, and completely irreplaceable. As you walk back toward the forest, you pass a pool, one of the few left with standing water. A frog leaps across your path. A dragonfly hovers in midair. A small modern beaver, no longer than your leg, bobs near the edge, chewing something with quiet purpose. It glances at you, just for a second, and in those eyes, maybe you see the faintest echo of the giants that came before. Not gone, Not really, just hiding in memory. You walk now in a landscape left behind. The marsh is still here in patches. The trees still sway. The wind still weaves through the grass with that sighing hush that only old places carry. But something's missing. And you feel it in your bones, in your footsteps, in the silence. So you do what we always do. When we lose something that mattered, you go looking for the pieces. Luckily, some of them remain. Fossils, bones, teeth, traces, echoes, pressed into the earth like the last lines of a forgotten poem. You're standing now at the edge of a small cliff in southern Ontario, staring at a shelf of grey stone, streaked with dark seams, sedimentary rock, layered by time and pressure, like a cake only a paleontologist could love. A few meters below, nestled in a shallow ledge, is a partial skull, exposed, waiting. You climb carefully down. Its unmistakable wide jaw, thick cheekbones, and those teeth, oh, those teeth. If there's one thing Castoroides left behind in spades, it's dental drama. Their incisors are legendary in fossil circles. Some stretch over 6 inches long, curved like ancient daggers and grooved like nature's chisels. They aren't just remnants, they're statements. Even now, long dead and turned to stone, they practically dare you to underestimate the beaver that wore them. One tooth, still embedded in the jaw, gleams faintly in the morning sun. Orange. Still. That hue, not rust, not dirt. It's from iron infused in the enamel, just like in modern beavers. Makes them stronger, tougher, even prettier if you're into prehistoric dental aesthetics. You gently brush away dirt from the jawbone and find something else, gnaw marks. Not predator bites, wear patterns. From decades of grinding, slicing, stripping plants. The fossil tells a story not of how this animal died, but how it lived, what it ate, how it moved its jaw, whether it favored the left or right incisor. It's a diary written in calcium and enamel, and it's not just bones. You make your way down the ridge to a small stream where paleontologists once discovered a trove of beaver remains. Not just one individual, but a cluster. Multiple partial skeletons all in the same sediment layer. Possibly a family group. Possibly a tragedy. No one knows. Historians still argue whether mass death sites like this were from natural disasters, floods, disease, or early human hunting. Some even suggest Ice Age beavers might have occasionally gathered in large numbers for mating or feeding and were caught off guard by a sudden shift. A collapsing bank, a rising river, a surprise predator. You pick up a small vertebra, half buried in the mud. It's worn smooth but still solid. It belonged to a spine that once swayed through marsh water, helping to propel a body as long as a kayak, as heavy as a refrigerator, and as quietly persistent as a thought you can't quite shake. Some bones you find are scattered. Others form partial skeletons enough to reconstruct posture, movement, size. From these fragments, scientists have rebuilt life-size models, beavers as tall as a child, with broad hips, strong limbs, and long, narrow tails. Yes, narrow, not flat like modern beavers. This detail often catches people off guard, but fossil impressions show the Castoroides tail was more elongated and less paddle-shaped. Think muskrat meets crocodile, thicker at the base, tapering to a point. Still functional in water, but not made for slapping signals or balancing dam logs. Just propulsion and steering in a soggy world. And then there are the skulls. You examine one on display at a nearby dig site. A perfect specimen laid out under glass. The eye sockets are high and rounded. The nasal bones long. The cranium broad, suggesting a sizable brain for its time. Not genius level, but no dummy either. What's most striking though is the jaw hinge. Massive. built for leverage. Like the beaver was designed not for chewing, but for power. It didn't nibble. It heaved. Nearby, a group of students cluster around a shallow pit where a technician is brushing dirt away from a cluster of fossilized rib bones. One student whispers, "Can you imagine if these were still around?" Another nods. "They destroy your deck in one afternoon." You laugh quietly. Fair point. But would they? We always imagine prehistoric animals as threats, as chaos. But from what you've seen from the mounds, the matted grass beds, the sleepy, drifting Castoroides, wasn't out to destroy anything. It just existed, fully, damply, silently. And now all that's left are pieces. But pieces matter. One fossil tooth led to the identification of the species in 1837 by William Clark of Lewis and Clark fame. Yes, that Clark. He discovered it in Big Bone Lick, Kentucky. A name that sounds like a joke, but is in fact one of the richest Ice Age fossil sites in North America. Since then, remains have been found from Florida to Alaska, from Nova Scotia to Nevada. The range was wide, the legacy deeper than anyone expected. Each fossil adds another sentence to the story, another clue, another reminder that these giants didn't just pass through history, they shaped it. And even in death, they whisper. You run your fingers across the fossil jaw. One last time, the groove of a long-forgotten tooth, worn smooth by centuries of sleep. And you promise quietly, maybe even to yourself, to remember. Because forgetting, that's the real extinction. You leave the fossils behind bone and stone, and ancient gnaw marks tucked carefully under glass or buried back in the mud. But the story doesn't end there, not even close. Because while the bones have mostly gone quiet, the stories still hum. And not in textbooks, not in museum plaques or paleontology journals. They hum in legends. You walk now along the edge of a northern lake, the kind that curls in and out of forest, like an old scar crystal, clear in places, dark and secretive in others. It's quiet here, but not empty. You're on the land of the Anishinaabe people, or maybe it's Cree, or Haudenosaunee. It's hard to say exactly because this land has been many things to many people for thousands of years. But across all those cultures, one thread remains. The beaver is never just a beaver. You settle beneath a cedar tree, sun filtering through the branches in dapples of gold and green, and start to recall some of the stories passed down through oral tradition. Some still whispered around fires, others etched into birch bark scrolls, and remembered in beadwork and drums. In many First Nations and Indigenous cultures of North America, the beaver is more than just an animal. It's a builder, a teacher, and sometimes a creator. One version of the creation story tells of a great flood, a time when the earth was covered in water. Various animals dove into the depths, trying to retrieve soil to rebuild the world. The muskrat succeeded. But in some versions, it's the beaver who helps build what comes next, carving rivers and ponds with its body guiding the new world into form. In others, the beaver is a symbol of determination, patient, clever, never giving up. A kind of sacred mascot for persistence. After all, what other creature carves the land without claws, reshapes rivers without asking, and still finds time to groom its tail? But here's where it gets interesting. Some of those stories passed down for generations speak not of little beavers, but of giant ones. Yes, giant beavers appear in traditional indigenous lore, sometimes as tricksters, sometimes as guardians, sometimes as spirits of the wetlands themselves. In Cree stories, there are tales of enormous beaver-like creatures who ruled the waters, known to shape the land with every tail slap. Some say these beings formed valleys. Others say they were hunted by heroes, great figures like Wisekejak or Nanabojo, the shape-shifting cultural heroes of many First Nations. One legend tells of a giant beaver that blocked a river with a dam so large it caused an entire valley to flood. The people had to call on the spirit beings to stop it. In the version told by the Mississauga, Ojibwe, the hero uses a bow the size of a tree to bring down the beaver. Its body falls forming hills. Its tail splashes carving out lakes. And here's the thing, when those stories were first recorded by settlers, scholars waved them off as myth. Cute, metaphorical, symbolic. But now, paleontologists have found fossil evidence right in those same regions of Castoroides, giant beavers, 8 feet long, living in massive wetlands that later tribes would tell stories about. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe those legends weren't just metaphors. Maybe they were memories, compressed through time, shaped by storytelling but rooted in real encounters, real impressions passed down through generations. The last echoes of a creature so unusual, so iconic, that it couldn't help but become mythic. Historians still argue whether oral traditions can count as evidence in the scientific sense. But more and more scholars are turning toward indigenous knowledge as a critical piece of the puzzle. A living archive of what the land once was and who lived on it. You walk along the lake's edge now, the water calm and gold in the fading light, and it's easy, so easy, to believe the stories. Because this place feels old and full, like something is watching, not dangerous, just present. You crouch near a birch tree and imagine what it would have been like centuries ago. A group gathered by the fire. The elder speaks. The children listen wide-eyed. The fire crackles. And the tale of the great beaver is passed again, this time with a warning. Do not forget the builders. They shaped the land before you walked it. They knew the water. They knew patience. You must too. You lean back looking at the sky streaked now with fading blue and the first hints of twilight and wonder. How many creatures we've lost, not just in bone, but in story. How many giants were buried not under earth but under silence. But the beaver, it hung on. In folklore, in memory, in tiny whispered warnings. You hear a splash from the lake. Maybe it's a duck, maybe it's the wind, or maybe just maybe it's the ripple of something ancient, reminding you that some stories never fully disappear. They just wait. The fire has burned low. The sky above the lake is a velvet dome, now pricked with early stars. You can still hear the soft sounds of the water lapping against the shore, but your thoughts have drifted to questions that never fully go away. Because let's talk about it. Let's revisit the Venice hypothesis. Yes, that one. The idea so weird, so wonderful, and so persistently whispered in the corners of paleontology forums that it refuses to die. The theory that the giant beavers of Ice Age Canada weren't just animals, they were urban planners. Alright, not urban in the skyscraper sense. No fossilized coffee shops or marsh-based zoning regulations. But some scholars, especially those operating delightfully on the fringes, have proposed that Castoroides may have engineered complex networks of water channels, mounds, and causeways, not by conscious design, not with intent, but by habit, by generation after generation, doing the same instinctual thing in the same space, to the same landscape until it began to resemble something very familiar to us: infrastructure. And that, dear listener, is where the Venice comparisons creep in. Because Venice, as in Italy Venice, didn't appear overnight. It was shaped piece by piece by people trying to live in a place not quite meant for living. Wet, sinking, inconvenient. And yet, they made it work, built atop the water, around it, with it. Now imagine this only fourier. You're sitting at the edge of a beaver-made canal, one that winds through a marsh like it knows where it's going. Raised mounds form a kind of dammed pathway, breaking the water into different sections. Some areas are deeper, cooler. Others are shallower, rich with plants. The water flows not in chaos, but in roots. Coincidence maybe, or maybe instinct repeated enough times becomes design. Fossil sediment layers in parts of the Midwest and southern Canada have revealed curious patterns. Mud embankments packed repeatedly across different strata. Pollen deposits stacked in alternating bands, suggesting vegetation was cleared, then regrown, then cleared again. It's the ecological version of wear marks on your favorite couch. Some modern beaver colonies show similar patterns. Over decades, they create a network of ponds and dams so complex, it rivals rural plumbing systems. One colony in Alberta, Canada, has maintained a dam over 2,500 feet long visible from space. It's been in operation by generations of regular-sized beavers for decades. Now upscale that to 300-pound rodents. With broader reach, with more territory, with deeper footprints literally and figuratively. Is it so hard to believe they could have done the same? Historians still argue whether these repeated settlement zones were truly planned in any meaningful sense. But planned might be the wrong word. Think evolved. A marshway metropolis born not of ambition but of biology. You think back to the colony you saw days ago. The mounds, the paths, the routine, everything moving in patterns, not chaos, the rhythm. There's even a more poetic fringe theory, your personal favorite if we're being honest, that suggests Castoroides may have been on the cusp of becoming something more than instinctive builders, that their behavior, if given more time, might have edged toward true construction, simple intentionality, the beginnings of adaptive design. Maybe they were halfway to domes. Maybe they just needed a few thousand more years. And a climate that didn't stab them in the back. One paleontologist wrote in a conference abstract, now lost to obscurity, that we may have interrupted something we never let finish. You sit with that for a while, because if that's true, it changes how we think about extinction. We always focus on the what went wrong, climate competition hunting, but maybe sometimes extinction steals potential, not just from species but from history, from possibility. You look out over the lake again, still, dreamy, unbothered, and suddenly you don't just mourn what was lost, you mourn what never got to be. You close your eyes and imagine it a vast marshland colony built not in bricks or wood, but in time and mud and memory. Dozens of giant beavers moving in slow loops, digging canals, raising mounds, dragging reeds. A system built across centuries. Not deliberate, but consistent. Enough to reshape the land. Enough to matter. And then gone. Flooded, dried, trampled, forgotten. Except for bones, and the occasional storyteller. And now, you. Morning finds you in a different place. Not in time, but in mood. Because once you walk through a vanished world, everything familiar starts to feel a little off. You're standing now on the edge of a modern marsh. Real time. Present day. Dragonflies buzz. Ducks paddle. And somewhere nearby, the hum of a car engine echoes faintly off a distant road. It's nice, but small. And then you see it, a regular modern beaver. It waddles from the underbrush with that same determined, awkward grace you've come to recognize. Fur slick, eyes half-lidded with sleepy confidence. It pauses at the water's edge, sniffs, and then slinks into the pond with barely a ripple. You watch it glide, dive, reappear. The same routine its ancestors followed for millions of years. But it's smaller now, much smaller. 3 feet long maybe, 50 pounds if it's had a good winter. Its tail is broad and flat, good for swimming and slapping. Its teeth are orange and strong, but nothing like the curved blades you remember from your nights in the past. And despite everything, despite the charm and cleverness, you can't help but feel something. You miss the giants. You miss the mounds wide enough to nap on. The tooth marks that told stories. The lazy, swamp-sized splashes that echoed like thunder. You missed the slow dignity of a creature that didn't just exist, but settled. You didn't expect this part, the grief, the small, quiet ache of having known something enormous, and now watching it scale down relative nibble sedges under a canoe rental sign. The modern beaver is brilliant in its own way, one of the few animals that can reshape entire landscapes. Its dams create ecosystems that support fish, birds, insects, even humans. It's industrious, loyal, low-key, adorable. But it's also a whisper of what came before. A pale echo. Still, that whisper's important. You follow the beaver from a respectful distance. It swims in a wide figure 8 across the pond, then vanishes into its lodge, a tidy pile of sticks and mud shaped like a low dome. You sit nearby and just watch. Because even now you can feel the old ones. Not ghosts, not exactly. But residue. Like the land remembers. Like this pond is only here because 1,000 generations of beavers giant and not carved it into being tail slap by tail slap over a timeline too long for human attention spans. It's humbling. It's beautiful. And it's also kind of unfair, because for every modern marble, every skyscraper, every space station, there are stories beneath our feet of what came before, whole lives that once ruled these spaces, and we rarely stop to ask who paved the way with muddy feet. You shift your gaze to the surrounding wetlands. You see tree stumps, evidence of modern beaver work. Channels cut through cattails, tiny slides worn smooth from repeated use. And suddenly you wonder, do modern beavers remember? Not in the conscious Netflix documentary way, but somewhere deep in their DNA do they carry the echoes of the giants? Do they dream in their own quiet way of bigger lives? Wider ponds? Taller mounds? Probably not, but you do. And maybe that's the point. Because now you carry it, the image, the memory, the idea of what once drifted through these waters. And it changes things. It makes you look at this little beaver with more than admiration, with reverence, as if it's holding something secret, as if it knows. The wind picks up. A few leaves drift across the water. And you hear faintly the sounds of modern life again, a passing truck, a ringtone in the distance, a dog barking at a squirrel, who refuses to leave the bird feeder alone. But here by the pond, everything is still. You lie back in the grass and close your eyes. And just for a moment, you imagine what it would be like if they came back. The real ones, 8 feet long, wide as a dinner table, stomping through modern marshes, ignoring golf courses and bicycle trails, blocking drainage ditches, flattening flower beds with the kind of innocent clumsiness only a prehistoric mammal can muster. Would they be welcome? Would they make headlines? Or would they, as most large creatures do in the modern world, vanish all over again? You don't know. But watching this little beaver poke its head back out from its lodge, you feel hope. Because it's still here, still building, still swimming in circles under a sky shaped by ancient footsteps. And in that there's comfort. A line hasn't been broken, just quieted. Let's run a wild one. You're lying in a patch of grass, near that modern pond, still thinking about all the ghosts you've met, 8-foot rodents, mammoths with attitude, whispering stones, and suddenly your mind drifts somewhere else, somewhere weirder. What if they came back? No, seriously, let's do this. What if Castoroides ohioensis, the giant Ice Age beaver, strolled out of extinction tomorrow and decided to check out your neighborhood pond or your backyard? Or heaven help us, your community swimming pool? Welcome to the giant beaver time travel hypothetical. Buckle in. First off, you'd notice it immediately. It would be like someone dropped a bear-sized meatloaf onto your lawn, covered in shaggy brown fur, with a tail like a muscled rope, and eyes that say I'm mostly harmless, but could also sit on your car. There's no easing into this. It's not a cryptid, not a maybe. It's here, and it's chewing through your water lilies like it owns the place. So what happens? Well, let's start with chaos. Pure hilarious logistical chaos. You'd have viral videos in minutes. Aerial drone footage of giant beaver disrupts suburban birdwatching group. Hashtags like Gerbris marszilla and Thicktooth. News anchors trying to pronounce Castoroides, while their producers Google rodent tranquilizer protocols. Then the biologists show up, the ecologists, the climate scientists. Everyone's confused, excited, slightly panicked. How did it get here? What does it eat? Can it be tagged? Does it want enrichment activities? And all the while, the beaver just exists. It swims. It builds mounds in places it shouldn't storm, drains backyard creeks, ornamental koi ponds. It digs canals across golf courses. It becomes a local menace and a national treasure at the same time. You can already see the neighborhood council meetings. Yes, Barbara, we know it flooded the cul-de-sac, but it's also a federally protected species now, so we can't just relocate him. His name is Todd the time beaver. Show some respect. Of course, the practical problems would follow. Let's be clear, modern infrastructure isn't made for 250-pound rodents with a compulsive need to rearrange water flow. Castoroides would disrupt everything. Stormwater management, parks, culverts, maybe even airports if it decides a runway drainage ditch looks cozy. And the ecological impact wild. On one hand, giant beavers would create wetlands, just like their modern descendants do, supporting birds, fish, amphibians, and countless plants. They'd boost biodiversity in struggling ecosystems, especially in areas where natural water systems have been degraded. On the other hand, they'd also flatten crops, redirect rivers, and possibly outcompete modern beavers. Imagine trying to share habitat with your 8-foot hay-stacking cousin. Not ideal. But here's the bigger question. Could we live with them? Not just tolerate, not just observe, but truly coexist. You'd need protected reserves, carefully monitored wetland corridors, public education campaigns so people stop feeding them donuts at boat launches, and good luck explaining to a middle schooler why their science fair project got flooded by an ancient rodent. Still, you can't help but imagine it. A future where Castoroides returns not as a novelty, but as a reminder. A presence that reclaims something we've paved over: slowness, wetness, persistence. The kind of life that doesn't want to dominate or optimize, but just shape the world quietly. One muddy mound at a time. Free instinctors already play with this. Geneticists dream of de-extinction, resurrecting vanished species with preserved DNA. So far, mammoths are the poster children. But Castoroides, Well, its bones are plentiful. Its genome may not be impossible to reconstruct. There's even a theoretical argument that giant beavers would be a better candidate for rewilding than saber-tooths or woolly rhinos, because they're non-predatory, ecologically useful, and let's be honest, absurdly charming. Historians and ethicists still argue whether de-extinction is wise at all. Should we resurrect species we let slip away? Can a creature from 10,000 years ago survive in a world of plastic freeways and TikTok? Hard to say, but in this little dream experiment you let it play out. You imagine school kids lining up at beaver reserves, sketchbooks in hand, marsh trails rebuilt for quiet observation, researchers studying sediment flows the way they once studied fossil beds. Maybe even beaver-human partnerships, water engineers learning from tail engineers. Sure, it's fanciful, but it's also hopeful, because in a world often obsessed with speed growth and domination, there's something revolutionary about a creature that just wants to float in circles and move mud. You watch your modern beaver friend one last time as it dives, flicks its tail, and disappears into the reeds. Small, silent, but with the heart of a titan. And you think, if the giants did come back, maybe we'd finally learn to slow down. You wake for the last time, not from sleep exactly, but from the long, soft trance. This story has wrapped around you. You're still by the water, still near the reeds, still cradled in the hush of the world. But something has changed. It's not the landscape. The marsh is still here, rippling gently under the breeze. Dragonflies zipping low over the surface, like sparks from an invisible fire. A modern beaver paddles in the shallows, trailing a mouthful of wet twigs. No, it's not the world that's different. It's you. You've seen so much now. You've walked among the giants, felt the weight of ancient eyes on you, heard the slap of prehistoric tails, the crack of shifting ice, the steady rhythm of creatures who once shaped the earth, not with tools or language, but with stubbornness and soggy resolve. You've wandered their cities, their muddy reed-wrapped settlements. You've crouched near their bones. You've stood in the ghost print of a footstep that once shook the marsh. You've heard their silence, and now, with the wind slipping over your shoulders like a blanket, you feel their story settling into you like sediment. It lingers. The Castoroides are gone. That much is true. Their bones rest in quiet stone. Their echoes hum through the fossil record. But they didn't leave us empty-handed. They left us a shape in the land, in the rivers that still bend oddly through northern Canada, in the peat bogs and marsh valleys that cradled their wide waddling forms, in the way we still build near water, in the legends we whisper about creatures that make the world rather than simply survive in it. They left us the idea that life doesn't have to be fast or flashy or loud to matter. And they left us their smaller cousins, the modern beavers, still building, still dreaming their soggy dreams, still living the legacy in miniature. Tiny engineers wearing the boots of giants. You rise slowly from your grassy spot. The sun is dipping now, turning the water into liquid bronze. The air is soft and damp and humming with the low sounds of dusk. You take one last look at the water. And then you do something quiet, something silly. You whisper thank you. Not to the reeds, not to the wind, to them, to the giants, to the ones who tried to build a wet city before anyone else thought to the tail slappers and mud draggers, the sleepy-eyed architects of a world we almost forgot. You start walking away slowly, carefully, as if trying not to wake something, but not out of fear. Out of respect, because the beavers are sleeping now, the big ones. But their story, it's still wide awake. So now here you are, back in your bed maybe, or curled up in a cozy chair. The lights are low, the fan hums, and the rhythm of the world has softened into something kind. Your mind still echoes with muddy paw prints, with distant splashes, with the gentle persistence of a creature who never asked for greatness, just water and time and the freedom to shape its space. And maybe that's what we all want, to shape something, quietly, slowly, without noise or fuss, to leave behind a curve in the land, a ripple in the stream, a story someone else might stumble into long after we're gone. The Castoroides did that. They didn't mean to. They didn't know they were building a legacy. But they did. And maybe we do too every time we choose patience over speed presence, over noise, kindness over conquest. So if your thoughts still swim a little, if the tail slaps and low grunts are still echoing through your sleepy mind, that's okay. Let them drift. Let the water carry them. Let yourself float. You're not lost. You're just moving gently like the surface of an ancient pond under a quiet moon. You can rest now. The story is told. The marsh is still. The builders sleep. And so now can you